And it is my great honor today to welcome back June Scott, who has shown us earlier in the year her trip to Cuba. So today we're going to Antarctica. And June is a widow, a mother, a grandmother, a traveler, a reader, and a hiker, and someone who's inquisitive about life. She has visited all 7 continents, 50 states, and 96 countries, and believes that travel gives us a vista and perspective on other people's lives. And the more we travel, the more we learn that people are really more like us than they are not like us. So it is with great appreciation today that I welcome June back and hope that we're going to have a lovely time in Antarctica, but it looks as though the sun is shining there.
Thank you, Janet. That was very lovely. And yes, I love to travel. And it's nice to see some of you. And I'm sorry I can't be out with you like I have in the past. And in the past, we've traveled not only to Cuba, to Iran. We were on the Siberian Railroad through China and Siberia and Mongolia and Russia. And today we're going, as Janet said, to the Antarctic. A most dramatic backdrop to me, and I hope you agree by the end of the session. And it is a place of isolation, a place of superlatives, coldest 128 degrees below zero, windiest 150 miles an hour wind, knock you over, the highest 16,000 foot mountains, but many are covered with ice and snow. In fact, the continent, 98% is covered with ice and snow. It holds up 75% of the fresh water in the world. And it is also the driest in the sense it is the lowest, less than 2%. So I'm going to let you just sort of get a peek at it, and then I'll join you in a minute. So I have been lucky to go 3 times. The first time was in 1999. And my mother-in-law had gone there in 1975, brought back beautiful pictures. And I became very interested. And as a teacher, I used penguins as a theme for school, pep in your step, pride in your stride. So I was anxious to get down there. So in 1999, my roommate from college and her husband invited me to go along. So we went there. My second one, the first trip I loved, it was to the peninsula, but I was disappointed that I wasn't following the footsteps of my hero, Ernest Shackleton. So my second trip, we went not only to the peninsula, but we went to the Falkland Islands in South Georgia, which I will tell you about in a little bit. But let's get started. I promised that I would take you down there, but I'm going to share with you some history. Then we'll see some of the environment and the wildlife. And then we'll end up with visiting some of the huts and the heroic explorers of the 20th century. Now, the Antarctic is the only continent that's never had a war. There are no indigenous people there. In 1959, 12 countries signed a treaty that it was only for no mining, no military, no drilling, no nuclear. It was just for peaceful purposes and for scientific and such. So they upnew the treaty whenever it requires. They have to have unanimous agreement between the nations. There are 70 research stations down there representing 30 different countries. The US has 3. They have the Palmer Station at the peninsula. They have the South Pole Amundsen research station at the South Pole. And then at the Ross Sea, they have McMurdo. So you can see it on this one, the Palmer Station. You can see the McMurdo and the South Pole Amundsen Scott. And we better get started because we have a long way to go. I flew from Chicago down to the tip of the South America. That's probably at least 17, 18 hours of flying. And we stay at the first night in Ushuaia at the tip. And this, when I first visited in 1999, was a little Swiss village of about 20,000 inhabitants. And the second time I was there, it was about 60. They have the most beautiful national park that you can visit and such. Now, as I said, we have to get started because we have a long way to go. My students always ask me if I'm going to stay on the, in the Holiday Inn. And I have to assure them that there are no hotels there and no indigenous people, only research stations. So this is our ship that will be our home for the next 3 weeks, the Clipper Adventure. It is a ship that is 330 feet long and 33 feet, 33 feet wide. And I'm telling you that because we're going to compare the size to the other ships we're going to be on. And I want you to notice the bridge, the windows on the top, and see how far they are from the deck and from the water, because many times we will have waves and crashing across that window. This is the bridge, and our captain was very friendly and hospitable and would invite us to visit anytime. If you couldn't sleep, you could go down. If you were up early, you could go down there, and they tell you how fast we were going, where we're going, the temperature of the water, and how all the instruments worked. Now, as I say, we did get to the tip of South America, but we're still not there. We still have to cross the most, it could be dangerous, but the most turbulent water, crossing the Drake Passage, named after Sir Anthony Drake. And of course, it's the cold water from the north and the warm water from the south. And it's churning just like a washing machine. And waves can be 35, 40 feet, tall. So let's get started. And during that time that we're on the ship, they're also giving us lectures about the birds and the wildlife. Another thing I have to tell you is there's about 4 months that you can go down there. In the wintertime, it doubles in size. And that's, I don't know if you remember the Emperor Penguin movie about the March of the Penguins. People wondered why the penguins marched the 70 miles into the interior. It's because if they had laid their egg on the edge, the chicks would not have a chance to mature. So the sun sets in March and rises in September. And so you usually go between November, our winter, their summer, such. So one of the first things you are on the ship, you're advised about always listening to, the announcements. Never leave the ship without a life jacket. Please don't fall overboard. We'll come back and get you. But if the water is 28 degrees, hypothermia probably will set in. This is how we traveled. Our expedition leaders would set out early each morning and check to see where we're going, how far we're going. Was it going to be a wet landing? Was it going to be a dry landing? And how many layers we should wear. Here again, you can see us getting the Zodiacs. There were 8 on the ship, and we had about 75 passengers. And of course, we always had our life jacket on, and here we are off. And I want you to notice the environment. And most people think, all the penguins are on the Antarctic continent. There are only 5 there. There are 17 different kinds, and they're all in the southern hemisphere. from the equator, which is the Galapagos, all the way down to the Antarctic. So I want you not only, and there's 17 different kinds, all sizes, all coloring, the largest, the emperor, which is 4 feet and 90 pounds, to the tiny blue fairy. So I want you to notice their differences in coloring and also the environment. They can waddle, they can toboggan. Here you can see some volcanic ash and rock, because there are volcanoes, live volcanoes on the Antarctic. This is the chin strap, very aptly named. This is the largest plant. This is the lichen. And then this is a creature I just learned about recently. I took this off the internet after I learned about him. He's the water bear. And they've discovered them in the ice cores that they have drilled out. And he becomes dehydrated, and he can be inside, all, dried up for, 2 or 3 years. Then you hydrate him and he becomes alive with 8 appendages. And the reason they're studying him is because they would be great to learn from him about space and such. Another thing that scientists study down there are the meteorites, and many fall. And of course, they feel that they're easy to find because they are, black and white, and they show up. We did not collect them, but we were told about them. And of course, this is evidence of the whaling industry in the turn of the century. And as I said, the Antarctic is now like a museum. You're invited to come and visit, take your pictures, but only leave your footprints. You have to take everything else out. And of course, the whaling industry was very important. And they had the big boilers that would boil the blubber so they can use on their lamps and on their ships. And I always like to take advantage of opportunities wherever I go. I'm wondering, would any of you go swimming with me to the Antarctic? Raise your hand if you would. I don't see many hands up. Well, I believe in doing, when you're in Rome, do as the Romans. So I wouldn't miss the opportunity to swim down to the Antarctic. Here again, the South Ocean is very cold. We happened to be in a cove, so it was a little warmer, and the various currents, but we didn't stay in all day. And you can see our ship over in the background. And of course, as we go around, you can see the scale between our little Zodiac and the scale of our ship, which is, over 300 feet long. And it is, very small by comparison. And of course, there's 300,000 different icebergs down there of various shapes and sizes, big as Rhode Island, as small as bitty burgers. And then you can see the crack on the iceberg in the right. And many times we would hear the moaning and groaning of these icebergs as they would be breaking off or breaking apart. And on the left, on the bottom, you can see how many times that particular one has flipped over. I'm going to take a drink just to make sure. Thank you. And of course, the penguins love catching a ride on the ice floes, and you find them everywhere. You realize the glacier is just a frozen river, moving down the mountain, and they keep coming and breaking off. And the blue ice is beautiful. It's the oldest ice. It's been compressed for hundreds of years, and all the air and oxygen has been pressed out. And we love, going and seeing them. And of course, there's a lot of wildlife, a lot of birds, snowy sheepbill, Antarctic kelp gull, Cape petrel, blue-eyed cormorant, and the wandering albatross. I don't know if he's a big bird. He's a very big bird. He will fly 500 miles to feed his family. He also can fly around the world without landing. And then you have the giant petrel, which is very similar, a very big bird with a wingspan of about 6 feet. And then, of course, we have all the penguins that return to the Antarctic, the 5, to build their nests. They spend most of their time in the water, 75% of the time. They only come ashore to lay their eggs and to molt, which they do once a year. They also build their nests out of the rocks and pebbles that are around. And you can see this chinstep has an egg and he's about to put it under his little brood patch. Here are some gentoo and some macaroni are sitting on their nests. They usually lay 2 eggs, so one will survive. And the parents take turns sitting on the nest. They are they mate for life and such, and they take turns. Here again, we have the gentoos build up the rocks. And we were on Brown Bluff Island, and this one penguin was, flipping his flippers, and I thought he was probably warm because that's how they cool themselves. But his egg had rolled out of the nest, and he was so upset. We wanted to help him, but as our ornithologist said, that's not nature, so we were unable to do that. If you're patient, your egg can be on your brood patch, and then you can see the comparison with my booth after this hatched. And of course, we visited some of the research stations. This happens to be the research station at Port LaCroix, which is a British research station. And the pack ice was so thick and solid. The pack ice can be 1 to 2 miles deep. In this particular day, it was wonderful. We could actually walk to the research station. And afterward, we had a soccer game with the crew on the pack ice. And then here's the British station. They're studying penguins and the ozone layer. I can remember this little building because we went in and visited with the scientists. And we also, I bought some postcards. And I have to say, the research stations, they are manned in the winter time and the summer. In the wintertime, there might be only 1,000. In the summer, there could be 5,000 to 4,000 to 5,000. And of course, this proves that I was here. It also shows you how many layers we have, our jacket, our pants to keep our dry. Now we're in for a treat. We're going to take our Clipper Adventure ship down the Lemire Channel. The day was beautiful. The sun was out. And people say, isn't it cold down there? Well, you know what? I'm used to Chicago, so it is not. I experienced anything from 26, 28, but there again, that's their summer. And so with layers, you're fine. And just the reflections and the mountains. And then we're about ready to go to the channel, and our captain says we can't because the ice is not melted. But you can see we can be on the deck anytime. We can be up in the crow's nest. And I can remember one day getting up very early in the morning and being the only one on the deck. And I just looked around me and I turned around 360 degrees and I thought, oh my gosh, how insignificant I am. Not in a sad way, but in a way to say, my goodness, how awesome that I'm here in this amazing environment. So, of course, our captain had a sense of humor. He wanted to see how close he could get to an iceberg. And you can see the scale that adults, very tiny compared to the ice. And of course, if you're out in the Zodiac, why not bring some, 100-year-old ice back for the drinks around the bar in the evening? And of course, we would venture out in our Zodiacs a couple of times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. And of course, here we are watching a glacier, which is a frozen river coming down. And one day, all of a sudden, we're hearing this horrible thundering noise. And we look up and there's a huge avalanche happening right in front of us. Fortunately, we heard it and saw it and we're fine. And then, of course, every day we'd have an excursion to some island or some area. And today we're visiting Penguin Island, as you can see, is very appropriately named. And of course, the penguin's main diet is krill, which is a shrimp-like creature that's 2.5 inches long. And as I said, they spend 75% of their time in the water. This is in a daily rookery, and it could have 600,000 penguins. And they returned every year to the same rookery, and they find their mates, and by calling them back and forth. And penguins usually I'm happy to tell you that little fellow got away. The penguins are black and white for camouflage. Their enemy from the air is that big, mean school bird, which has a wingspan of at least 4 feet. And he really is mean. If he catches up with a chick or an egg, he destroys it. And so you are happy when they get away. Now, what's happened to this person? Is this a penguin that's of a different species? No, he's been tobogganing. And as I mentioned, their diet is krill, which is pink. And you can see that the squan is all over. So he will be clean when he goes into the water the next time. And of course, here's another one that's been tobogganing, and he's a rock thief, taking it from his adjacent neighbor to his own. And the penguin is an amazingly adapted bird. He doesn't fly, but his big, strong flippers helps him fly through the water. He can go 25 miles an hour. He can actually waddle a half a mile an hour for 50 miles. His tail is like a rudder, and he has feathers, 100 within a square inch that are overlapped like roof shields. And so he keeps very warm along with his blubber. You can see the guana. You can see the penguin with the 2 chicks. And of course, as they get bigger, they can't get themselves into the brood patch, but that's okay. And of course, the penguin chicks are born with a down. And like you can't go in the water with your down. So in order to be fed, the adults have a pocket in their cheek where they can go to the sea, bring back food, and then regurgitate it till the chicks have their adult feathers. Another adaptation is they have a gland that can change salt water to fresh water. Their eyes are so adapted with a lens that they can see underwater. So they are amazing in their adaptation. Here's the chick, almost as big as their parent. My students would often ask, Mrs. Scott, have you ever pet one? And of course, I told them I was visiting in their environment, and I would not, do that because I was just a visitor and I want to respect it. And of course, our guides and leaders would say we weren't to get any closer than 15 feet, but of course they didn't know that. And this one pecked my boot, so I figured I could take its picture. The only time I did pet one is when I took my grandson, who was visiting from Washington, to the Shedd Aquarium, and we had the emperor or the penguin experience, and we did get to touch one. But here again, this shows you the overlapping feathers that keep him warm. And of course, the weather's changing all the time. Our expedition leaders would warn us to make sure you're dressed warmly, because, if we are delayed in picking you up, but if the weather changes, we might have to come back very quickly. So you can see we've been called back to the ship, and I think the penguins are going with us. There are all kinds. You can see how well they're cleaned up. They can hop and climb. And you can see the one on the left on the top, the gentoo is calling to his mate. He's clean on the bottom, and the chin strap is very pristinely clean. Now we are going to see some of the rock hoppers, and they literally are rock hoppers. They can jump up 4, 5, 6 feet out of the water. We're barely standing up because of hard winds, but they can flip up and jump up and be very sturdy on their feet. There again, some new kind of coloring. Their chicks are brown as opposed to gray. And of course, there's lots of different seals down there. You can probably notice that this is an elephant seal, but there's mink seals, crab eater seals, Waddell seals, and even leopard seals. And of course, baby seals and groups of baby seals, the first seal mother. And these are the crab eater seals that are very comfortable, and they get along. The only one they don't get along with are the leopard seal that you'll see in a little bit. As I say, they come to the shore to lay an egg and to molt, and you can see them molting. And they molt once a year, and it takes about 3 weeks. And their feathers are really, in the cold water and the ice and the rocks, so that's very necessary. This king penguin's very, very proud of his egg, so he's lifting up his brood pouch so you can see. Now, isn't that a little creature only a mother could love? You can see his underwear showing. But he is a baby chick, and of course that's his down. And this is, he'll almost be able to go swimming, and he has his adult feathers. But the transition is interesting to watch. And of course, he wants to be fed. This is the hen. He's not going to give up. Go back, go back. And so you can see the Salisbury Plain, the glaciers, king penguins, as far as I can see, and the tussock grass. They're in all kinds of environment. And of course, they go out to sea, the big three. And you can see on the left, they're sharing the beach with the curious fur seal. This is an interesting experience. This was on my second trip, and I wanted to follow in Shackleton's footsteps. And he and his men, slid down this with ice. And I wanted to see the waterfall. And so I was taking a picture of it, and I'd always heard about catabolic winds, which are winds that suddenly come down a mountain and really, are very, miles and miles of 20 miles, 100 miles an hour per hour in wind chill. And all of a sudden I was picked up. I turned around to take another picture because I thought, oh, maybe my first one's not good. So I stood up, turned around, and all of a sudden I'm picked up in the air. And I don't know how long I was up in the air, but I remember thinking, am I going to fall on my face, on my back? Am I going to fall on my camera? Fortunately, I landed and everybody came running and I was fine, but I will always remember catabolic winds, and that's where it happened and such. So, I was going to ask you, would you ever see cows and penguins together? Well, this is on a little island, a Falkland Island, and a young couple owned the whole island. And I thought, well, if I bought this island, I could have my own Magellantic penguins. They were raising cattle, but soon were to transition into raising sheep because it was more of a financially profitable business. So this little chick has a different coloring. You can see the black stripe on his the Magellanic with his black stripe, the pink in his eyes, which helps regulate the heat. And of course, you can see penguins low, high, everywhere. And you also see ice, blue ice that's the oldest, icebergs of all sizes and shapes. This one, it probably took us half an hour to pass. I don't know how much of an iceberg you think you see, but you really only see about 7 to 12%. And this I did not take, but a friend alerted me to it because it was taken from an oil rig. But I think, when I show this to the young people, they can recognize the contrast. And of course, at night, it's beautiful as the sun sets, and it's like a moon or a Mars, environment. And of course, I have to take you to other parts to show you some more penguins. This is Stony Point in South Africa. And the South African penguin has the stripe, he has dots, he has black feet, he has the pink, and they're very, curious, friendly, and you can see the molting on the right, and a little ready to go swimming. This was a delightful place. This is in Boulder Beach. And Boulder Beach, right above the shore, there were a lot of houses. And of course, at one time, the penguins and the residents would swim together. But after a while, there were so many penguins that they designated to only for penguins. So we got to visit, but we couldn't swim with them. And they have all kinds of adaptions. There's the erect crested, you notice the red beak, then the spiny tongue, the barbed teeth that can help strain the krill, and then the beak to capture it. And then the little tiny Galapagos penguin that's right up by the equator. And we went swimming with the huge turtles in Galapagos when I was there, and with the penguins, but they were very skittish. Now, I never thought I'd get back a third time, but I get a lot of travel information. And one year I got an invitation to join Quark on a Russian icebreaker for a month, and not go to the peninsula, but to the Ross Sea on the other side of the continent. And I'd always, by this time, I'd only seen 15 of the 17, never thinking I'd get to see the last 2 because they were only on sub-Antarctic islands. So I looked at it and I thought, oh, it's pretty expensive, but it doesn't hurt to call. So I called, and this is like 18 months ahead of time. And they said, you know what, it's full. I must have sounded a little sad because they said, oh, don't worry, we'll put you on the waiting list. And I said, you do that. I felt good about it, but never paid much attention, went on teaching. And then in March, I get a invitation that says, we have found a cabin for you, have your money in by Friday. So I decided I would go and not buy a car that year. So this time we did not go to end up at South from Ushuaia. We actually flew to Christchurch in New Zealand, the South Island. And we left from Littleton, just south of Christchurch, and we went to the Ross Sea, as you can see in the map. And of course, there again, you can see from the tip of South America, you can also see the tip of New Zealand, and why we left from different places. This is Littleton, South Island, New Zealand, a beautiful port city. And of course, this is our home for the next month. Captain Klevenoff. It had 9 decks and 6 engines of 18 tons each, which could maybe go 16 to 19 knots a hour. And as I said, it had 9 decks, and that's how we would get our exercise going up and down. And there's the bridge that we could also do. And here we are saying goodbye to Littleton, full steam ahead. And we were lucky, not only on our first trip, I said there were about 75. The second trips were under, probably 90, they were 90. And this ship not only had the 8 Zodiacs, but they also had 2 helicopters that enabled us to go farther and see more things. So this is a landing patch. And of course, I told you about the Drake Passage, and with the waves of 35 and 45 feet tall. Well, I had a seatbelt on my bed so I wouldn't fall out. And fortunately, I didn't. I got used to the rolling and the pitching and going side to side. It sort of put me to sleep. And it's interesting, as I mentioned to you before, they encouraged us whenever we were outside walking on the ship to know where we were going, hang on to something, know where your foot's going to be. And if we got up in the morning, we'd see white bags along the corridors, along the banisters. We knew those were barf bags, and it was going to be a rough day at sea. There again, we, went by Zodiac. Oh, I'm so excited. We're now at the Snare Islands, and this is the Snare penguin, my 16th of the 17. So I was really excited. He has a red eye and a red beak and beautiful coloring. And of course, they also on Campbell Island had the shag. And they had a lot of hooker seals, which are the young seals that are always making noise and honking, you know, let us know that they're very, very macho. This is the radiforest that are on this island, and there's so much wind that it's just, you know, it goes back and forth, and the leaves are gone, and this just shadowy. But we discovered the yellow-eyed penguin, and he seemed to be the shyest of all the penguins we saw. And you can doesn't look like the Antarctic area, subantarctic island. It looks like Colorado. But here is how windy it is, and he's up looking for someone. And of course, the scenes from the ship were beautiful during the day, during the night, and with all different kinds of ice, pack ice, grease ice, and polina, which is the captain's always looking for an opening so that he can go through the ice the easiest way. Frazzle ice, which is just beginning to freeze. The pancake ice looks just like a pancake. The finger ice, and then of course the big ice ridges that, you know, the ships have to go through. And of course, we have the wonderful, beautiful icebergs all over. And here we have the polina that the captain is following. And we could be on deck at any time. You could be walking, doing your miles, you could be exercising. And everybody's wondering what's going to happen when we get to the end and we can't go any farther. And of course, it's going to be like you, if you were driving in the snow, you got in the snowbank, you're going to gun the engine, and you're going to go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And that's exactly what the captain did. He would usually only use 5 of his big engines, but then when he got to the end of and there was no opening, he'd back it up and start churning back and forth and then go forward. And of course, we'd watch all the penguins, hoping they wouldn't be run over as we come along. Here is the enemy of the penguin from the water, looking up at his tummy, hoping it's a penguin, but maybe he'll think it's a sun and free the penguin. And, you know, they look friendly, but they are mean with the penguins. And now we're about to go to Franklin Island. And this is where all the emperor colony is. And it was just beautiful. And of course, we went by helicopter. And to get there, once we landed, we had to walk 3 to 4 miles and snow up to our knees. Here he's saying, Mom, look, no feet. And there again, you can see them preening, you can see their tail, their overlapping feathers, their coloring. Now we're on, here with the penguins. Now these are emperors, and they are 4 feet tall, 90 pounds. And you can see how they're dwarfed by the icebergs around. You can see that we've been there long enough that the sun is changing and the sun is setting. And we still have to hike back to the 3 or 4 miles back to the helicopter drop. And you can see the snow coming on, but we still get to see the chicks. And as I said, the emperors are the ones that breed in the wintertime when the wind is 150 miles an hour, 128 degrees. And so they do what they call huddling, which means these are the males. The women have laid the egg. The male is now, protecting the egg so that it will hatch. And so the ones in the middle get hot and they move, and then they've taken movies of them and they just keep moving around and around. And you can see how teeny and how close they are, and that's how they keep warm. And the male has the egg on his feet, which is the warmest part, because they're black, you know, for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 weeks. And he loses a third of his weight. He gets down to about 60 pounds. But we, there again, always advised about dressing appropriately so that when we, you know, are in a place, we'll be warm enough till they come get us. And both have to be working. And of course, each helicopter holds 8, and, you know, they have us lined up for getting on. And then the scenery we see is amazing. This is Mount Elbrus, the most southerly volcano. In fact, there's usually smoke coming out of it, and there's a molten lake on top. And then this is Mount Terror, which is extension of the Andes, and you can see more pancake ice. And there again, 360 your camera cannot take. So there again, we're watching the penguins, they're skating. Now we're off for an adventure. And here again, we're loading the helicopter and we're going to visit Shackleton's hut at Camp Royds. And I have to tell you that these huts have been preserved by the National Heritage Foundation in South Island of New Zealand. And here in this little hut of 30 feet, they actually they found 40,000 different items that they either preserved on a site or took back to Littleton to preserve. And they were very cautious. Only 8 of us could go in at a time. And every time we went to visit an island or a hut, we actually had to vacuum our pockets and our jackets and our boots and make sure we wouldn't contaminate the next stop. And of course, I loved many of Shackleton's sayings, where we're going, we don't need roads. Here is that hut. You can see their supplies. You can see the dog houses inside. This is the kitchen. This is where they would sleep. This is his black, dark room. And this was his site. This was, in a daily colony. And this is what he would see when he'd get up in the morning. And of course, when we're on the ship and we're up in the helicopter, you can see how small we are by our environment. And you can see all the decks, and you can also see how they're looking for Polina at the dark area so they can get through. This was one of my favorite, unbelievable days. There again, the pack ice was thick enough that our expedition leaders said, you know what, we can get off. So they also let us get off and wander around, take pictures, and mingle with the emperor penguins. And they said, you know what, be patient, just sit down and sit on the ground, and they'll come up and near you. They're curious. And sure enough, they'd peck my boot and they would peck my camera. And I thought, you know what, the penguin lady can die and go to heaven, and it was worth every cent. And of course, they're beautiful, they're colorful, he's preening, they're elegant. And of course, we were told to stay away, a distance, but they didn't know. So they had actually put a flag so we'd know which side we'd be on. They can toboggan, they can go into the water. Do you think I can get in? Yep, I can plop, I can swim, I can get out. And then of course, the elegant emperors are all over. And, one is more gorgeous. It's like, snowflakes. They're all different, but very similar. Our ornithologist found an egg that weighed a pound. Now we are off for an event that our ornithologist was so excited about. He had been there for 200 times, and he'd never seen the dry valleys. But the dry valleys is the only part of the Antarctic that doesn't have ice and snow. and such. So we're off. And as I mentioned, we would be broken down to groups of 8, and we would have different groups going at different times each day. Well, the previous day, our group had went early. This time, we're going at 11 o'clock at night. Remember when I told you 24 hours of darkness, 4 hours of light. So. You can see it, you can see why NASA does studies there, because it's so much like the surface of the moon and Mars, and it's the dry valleys. And by dry valleys, as I said, it's where, you know, there's not much snow compared to the rest of the continent. And I think I mentioned that, you know, 98% of the continent is covered in ice, and the ice contains 75% of the fresh water on the world. And of course, here we're landing. We visit a 1,000-year-old mummified seal, and you can see, you know, a little of the ice. And just over the way is McMurdo, which is one of the Ross Sea research station of the U.S. And of course, now we're going to visit Captain Robert Fulcom's hut. It snowed that day, so it was great. It was very appropriate. He was very much a scientist, so he had a lab. He also had a table. Shackleton ate with his men. Robert Scott ate with his officers, and the crew ate elsewhere. There again, your sleeping bag and your particulars. How about some cheese? This is how it was left 100 years later. And it's interesting. Under the in Scott's hut, they found fruitcake that was 100 years old, and it wasn't too bad, they said. But under Shackleton's, they found 2 cases of brandy and whiskey, and only 1 bottle missing. They also had connoisseurs come in and analyze it and reconstitute it. And on our ship, they were auctioning off bottles to make money for the Heritage Foundation. And they were going for $2,000. So we're off to Camp Bird to visit a daily workery. And there again, we have those mean school birds always looking for somebody. And you can see the weather changing, getting very snowy. And of course, I am walking back with my ski goggles on, leaning over and thinking, oh, at least I'm going back to a cabin that's going to be warm. Can you imagine about those explorers when they had to go back to the here again, you can see this point back punching away. And that's why now our clever adventure had stabilized. This ship, as an iceberg, did not have stabilizers. So that you know, get really cold, and that's why I had a seatbelt. But there again, you can see this changing weather, the sunset, the waves. I am at Macquarie Island, an island that gets 335 days of rain. And of course, they have the penguin that it's going to make my 18th. And of course, lots of seals. You can see they also molt. Hi, Mom. I did brush my teeth. And of course, they have king penguins. They have Gentoo penguins. And they have royal. This is number 18 for me. And I was thrilled to be, you know, have seen all the 17 different penguins in their natural habitat. Not on everybody's bucket list, but I was delighted. And of course, there again, you can see the dark sand, and they are just marching up and down the beach. If we didn't get out of the way, they would knock us over. And of course, the kings and the royals all get along on the same island. And you can see the seal there. That's the crab apple seal. And of course, their rookeries are so crowded, and you can hear them. Sometimes they get tucked away, and sometimes they get pretty dirty, but they clean up well. And you can see a little chick trying to get in under the brood patch, which with a little difficulty, but boy, they clean up well. And here again, you can see as far as the eye can see, they can swim. And here are those waves I told you about in the setting sun. Now I'm going to take you back 100 years to the heroic exploration, and we're going to meet some of the heroes of that time. I don't know if you remember the race to the South Pole. A Norwegian, Roald Amundsen, and Captain Robert Scott, an Englishman, were going to race to the pole. And of course, Amundsen decided he was going to take skis. He could ski. Scott did not like to ski. He wasn't very good at it. And so he decided to take ponies. He did take some dogs too, but he also took ponies and motorized vehicles to go. And who do you think won? Maybe you remember that Amundsen got there. His dogs came through. The problem with Scott, they got there too. Amundsen got there in December. This was in 1911. And Scott got there in January. And, you know, after slipping and sliding and sledding and sledging and stumbling and walking across the staggering, they got there and they saw the Norwegian flags and that they, you know, had lost the race. That Amundsen had won. And on their return trip, they had been at this for 78 days. And on their return trip, this is what they found, as somebody else had gotten there. So on their return trip, they were within 7 miles of the next food depot. And the weather was so bad, there was a whiteout and a blizzard that they had to get back in their tent and stay there. And they all perished. And this is Scott's final entry: "We shall stick it out to the end. But we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more." He did include in this one of his entries that "Please take care of my men," because they were very, very brave and did a good job. Now, these men died in January. Their bodies weren't found to the following October. But along with the bodies, they also found 35 pounds of science experiments, because he was very much a scientist and such. So they did make a difference. Now I wanted to tell you about Scott. He also had a North Party, which did survive. The ship didn't get back, so they had to winter over. There were about 9 men, and they lived in the ice cave and would lie together, you know, alongside each other like sardines. And there was a doctor that would dole out the biscuits to those who were ill or something. So here's Shackleton. And of course, Shackleton had been to the Antarctic several times. He'd been with Scott, but he wanted to take his own expedition. Somebody had gone to the South Pole, so he decided he would like to go across the continent. He figured, you know, that the sail down there will take about 4 or 5 months. Then to cross 1,500 miles, you know, I'll be back within a year, never knowing. And of course, if you're going to go and have a expedition, you have to collect a crew, you have to collect money. And so he put an ad in the paper. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. Now, I want you to realize he got 5,000 applications. He even had 3 women apply. He did not take any, but he also, once they were out for shore, they even found Percy Blackborough, who was a stowaway. And of course, Shackleton took him to the office and said, if we run out of food, we eat stowaways first. But he ended up being a good sailor. Here is his crew. Shackleton's in the white shirt in the middle. He had scientists, doctors, carpenters, sailors, all kinds of expertise, photographers. And this is his crew. Here's Shackleton, the man that where we're going, we don't need roads. And I want to introduce you to some very important people in this particular expedition. Frank Wild was the second in command. Tom Crean was known as a tough sailor. If you're going to do anything, you wanted to be on his team. We have to thank Frank Hurley, the young Australian on the left, who took the pictures, and then Captain Worsley, who was an amazingly calm and capable captain. And of course, the only kinds of instruments he had were very simple. There was the sextant that measured the angle of the horizon and the sun, and then the chronometer that did the latitudes and the latitude and longitude. And of course, they didn't have any GPSs, satellites, OnStar, walkie-talkie, cell phones. So you have to realize they're really out of touch. So here's our captain. And of course, they had left England August of 1914. And they had loaded up with tents and sleeping bags and dogs and food and coal, all their equipment, games and things to take with them and such. But then they also after they left, by the time December came along, they were at South Georgia and they felt that they needed more whale meat for the dogs. They needed some more coal. So they stopped at the South Georgia island. And I want you to notice these mountains because we'll refer to them later. And of course, I want to introduce you to the ship. Remember our other 2 ships, one was over 300, one was over 500. Well, this one was 144 feet long, only 25 feet wide, had 4 decks, and it was made out of wood, especially so that it would be able to take the pressure of the ebb and flow of the ice and snow. And you can see how it is dwarfed by the icebergs. Shackleton knew his men very, very well. He kept them entertaining. He knew the troublemakers. He knew who needed more food. He would share his food. He kept them with music, poetry readings, plays, games, and keep them happy. And of course, here's the stowaway that ended up being a good. And of course, the whalers said, you know what? Time for you to get going. It really is, an unusual season. I don't know about the ice. You better get started if you expect to get through. So they started out, and January 14th was the first or second day of any sunshine at all. So they took advantage, got out with the dogs and walked the dogs. But every morning they'd wake up and their ship would be, be between all these ridges. They'd have to go by skis. And, they'd try to get farther with all the sails up. And one day they finally decided, even the sails weren't doing it. They would get out and try to get out and do it themselves. And they spent all day and they got nowhere. But Shackleton always said difficulties are just things to overcome after all. And so near, January, February, he's looking out, sort of sizing up the situation. You can see Hurley taking a picture. And he wakes up to 3 and 4 inches of ice and snow on the rigging. And he finally realizes once the ice gets you, it keeps you. And so he decides it's time to abandon ship. And they only take those things by October, they left in August of 1914. So we're into 15 already. over a year. And he says, man, we can only take the basics. So they took the 3 lifeboats and loaded them. They weighed a ton. And he actually told Frank Hurley, the photographer, that he had to get rid of half of his glass slides. Luckily, we had still some left. These I scanned from a book of Frank Hurley's pictures. And here you can see the men trying to pull these tons of equipment with their ships. Now, they are, Shackleton realizes he has to get his 27 men back. He's responsible. They're out of touch. There's no way of communicating. He believes that back home, they're presuming they're dead because they haven't heard from them. They aren't back yet and such. So he decides to take the men to Elephant Island. And I'll show you Elephant Island a little bit. And Elephant Island's a small island, all craggy and mountainous. And if he gets the men there, he can leave them and then go further on back to the whaling station. So they finally get on land. They've been on the ice and snow, sledging along for 497 days on the ice floe. But they finally get it to Elephant Island and they pull the lifeboats ashore. And they have been, in the Burberrys and not showered or changed for, how long. And their first hot drink in a long time. And just glancing at this map, I want you, they left, as I say, way up from England. Then they went down to South Georgia. Then they got stuck in the ice. They had abandoned ship. And then they had that 300 miles to go by pulling those life boats on the ice. And of course, for Shackleton recognizing he's responsible, that he better, take care. And so he has the carpenter up the gunnels and put a canvas in. But I want to read you something to let you know while they're on the ice, how things are happening. And this is Shackleton speaking. We were camped on a piece of ice floe. An hour before midnight, I felt uneasy. I don't know why. I left my tent and walked across the floe. Suddenly, the ice cracked under my feet. It cracked right under the men's tent. And as the ice opened, the canvas of the tent began stretching apart. I could hear muffled shouts as the men woke. The crack widened. I threw myself down on the edge. In the black water, a whitish object was floating. It was a sleeping bag with a man inside. I grabbed it, heaved it, and got bag and man onto the ice. Second later, the edges of the ice crushed together with a tremendous force. Then the crack opened again. Can you picture that? Some of us were on one piece of rocky floe. The rest were on the other. There was no more sleep that night. We managed to scramble onto a flat piece of ice and huddled together, watching for more cracks. Killer whales hunted in the water between the ice floes. The night was very dark with flurries of snow. Around 3 a.m., we lit the blubber stove and everyone had a hot drink. Then we began to feel better. So that's what the conditions were. But anyway, he decides that he's going to take 5 men. He left the second in command, Frank Wild, back with the 22 men. And he took Tom Crean, the tough sailor. And he took Captain Worsley, who was going to, get them across the 800 miles of open water. And then he had several other ones. He took the troublemaker, so he, could keep him in sight. And so they were off. And of course, the 22 men that left behind are waving goodbye, never knowing when or how or if they will ever be rescued. And of course, Frank Wild is in charge and he gets people setting up the other 2 lifeboats as their home. And every day they'd get up and said, hurry up, do your chores, clean, wash, cook. Today the boss may return. Well, the boss did not return for 4 months, but here's the crew that was left behind. And you've got to really admire those men. This is Elephant Island when I saw it. And you can see how craggy it is. I don't see how anybody could live, let alone 22 men for 4 months. Here are the penguins jumping out. And this is what they were looking at. And this is what they're experiencing, looking for the men. Would they ever come back? And finally, as I said, the 6 men in this little 23-foot James Cade were in the ocean, and they had bad weather and only the chronometer and the sextant, and they were afraid the island was so small that they missed South Georgia, but they finally landed. But the problem was they were on the wrong side of the island. They got there, but they were on the wrong side of the island, so they had to climb over the 7,000-foot mountain. So 3 of the men were quite ill, so they left them on the shore. And Tom Crean and Worsley and Shackleton decided to climb over the mountain, 7,000, without a map. The equipment they had was a little blubber stove to melt ice. They had 50 feet of rope, and they took nails out of the boat to put on their shoes so they wouldn't slide. Okay. And such. And then they started out realizing that they have to climb this mountain without a map, with all the crevices. And they finally do. And all of a sudden they are hearing kids playing outside, and they hear the whistle from the station, and they're so excited that they decide to slide down the other side, you know, even with all the crevices, not knowing. And once they got there, they, of course, scared the young children who scattered. And here are the mountains that I was telling you about. And of course, then they go to the door, and he knocks, and the whaling master says, "Whose is it?" And he says, "It is I, Shackleton." Well, by that time, it's been almost 2 years, and they are thinking they are seeing a ghost. But of course, the whalers say, "We definitely will go. We'll send the Yelko." But they tried 3 times. It took to the 4th time till they could get back to rescue the other 22 men. And of course, it's been 2 years by that time, and they were rescued and they get back. But I want to sort of review with you the things that they, you know, look at. Left August 14th, didn't get back to the 30th, spent almost 500 days on the ice, the 300 miles between when they sank and with Elephant Island, and then 800 over to South Georgia. So as Shackleton always said, by endurance we conquer. And would you believe, even after this, when they returned, it was about the time of the First World War. So their expedition was overshadowed by, you know, what was happening in the world at the time. But many of the people that the sailors and people on that ship actually went to war. Shackleton went back a few years later. He died in the early of his 40s, and his wife said, "Bury him there because he's happiest there." So I hope you agree that tongue and pen fail in attempting to describe this magic place. That's what Shackleton said, and I agree. So take our last look at this beautiful backdrop and isolation, but a view and experience.